welcome to Desire Made Real, a Discovery of Witches podcast, the bonus episode. Mandy's not here, so I'm doing the intro. It's a little bit weird for me. I'm Caitlin, and if you listen to our Season 1 episodes, you may have realized that someone was missing from our Season 2 coverage.
Hey! Yeah. Hey, I am Anya, professional biologist and amateur podcaster. Mandy and Kate invited me to join them last season because Season 1 had a lot of genetics. This season has basically none, but I didn't want to get left out of the fun completely until Matthew and Diana head back to the modern day in Season 3, so here I am.
For this bonus episode, the two of us are going to talk some Elizabethan science and then have a sort of general chat about the first 5 episodes of the show so that Anya has a chance to just sort of fangirl with us, you know.
Yeah. There's a lot to love about this season.
There is.
The first thing that I wanted to talk about is actually a little bit about genetics. So we find out in episode 4 that blood range? Okay. Excuse me. Sorry, blood rage runs in the de Clermont family through Isabeau's line. And Isabeau specifically talks about her and Marcus being carriers while Matthew actually exhibits the signs of disease. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about recessive genetics and what it means to be a carrier.
Ooh.
So in general, when people talk about being a carrier for a disease, they're referring to diseases that are caused by recessive genes. So what that means is that, you know, for most organisms, including humans, we have 2 copies of each chromosome and therefore each gene, except for the sex chromosomes, but we're just ignoring that for now. And so forms of a gene are called alleles, right? So the gene is like the specific spot in the genome, and then the allele is like the flavor of gene that you happen to have. And so alleles can be either recessive or dominant. So a dominant gene is one that you only need 1 copy to show that trait. A recessive gene is one where you need 2 copies to show that trait. And, you know, it's called that because if you have one copy of a recessive version of an allele, 1 copy of a dominant allele, the dominant one is the one that shows through.
Okay.
Right? Okay. If you have 2 copies of the recessive, you'll show the recessive. 2 copies of the dominant, you'll show the dominant. But where, you know, that distinction is made is when you have 1 of each, which one becomes visible in your traits.
That's like eye color, right? Works the same way.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like blue eyes are recessive. So, you know, if 2 people with blue eyes have kids, all of their kids will have blue eyes because in order to show blue eyes, you have to have 2 copies of the blue eye allele. But 2 brown-eyed people can have babies with blue eyes, right? Because they could each have 1 dominant copy of the brown allele and 1 recessive copy of the blue allele. If they both pass on the blue recessive copy to their kid could end up with 2 blue alleles.
Right. Okay.
And then have blue eyes. Yeah. So that's normally how we think about recessive genetics, and usually that's what we mean when we say someone is a carrier for a disease. They carry 1 recessive copy, so they don't actually show the disease, but then if they have offspring with someone else who also is a carrier, if they both pass on the recessive carrier version of the gene, then their offspring can actually have the disease or like show visible disease symptoms.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So that's like your standard version of what it means to be a carrier. That doesn't really make sense in terms of what we know about vampire genetics and how that's passed on, right? Because when you don't have 2 vampire parents, right? I mean, like Matthew calls Isabeau mom and Philippe dad, but Philippe is not really his dad.
Right.
In the same way that Isabeau is his mom, because she's the one that sired him.
Important aside for people listening, Anya, you've only read the first 2 books, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Just so
Although,
people who have read all 3 books know why we're not addressing a 3rd book thing here.
Okay, yeah. Although, actually, it is funny because I think when I was listening to the first episode, the spoiler section was just book 2 stuff, and I was like totally chill with that. And then the next spoiler, you started talking about all sorts of crazy shit from book 3, and I was like, no, and then immediately turned it off, but it was too late, but it's fine.
We do warn people.
Yeah, you do. I just thought I was safe anyway. I thought it was like book 2 spoilers. Anyway, so when I was first watching this part of the TV show, I was like annoyed that Isabeau used the word carrier, because I was like, you can't really have recessive dominant interactions if you only have one parent, right? Because if Isabeau is passing whatever vampireness she has onto Matthew, there's nothing else that can cover that up. But there is another way that you can have diseases shipping. Wow, this phantom on the brain, skipping generations without having dominant recessive interactions. And that's something called incomplete penetrance. So what that means is that sometimes, even if you have what would be considered a dominant gene, sometimes it just won't fully express itself for whatever reason. And so, geneticists call that incomplete penetrance. And so it is actually consistent with what we know about genetics and biology that Isabeau could have the gene for blood rage, not exhibit blood rage, and then, her offspring Matthew could show it, and then Matthew's offspring would not show it. Like a real geneticist would not really call that being a carrier. They would just say, the gene has incomplete penetrance. For some reason, it's expressed in some individuals, but not in others. But they probably wouldn't use the word carrier, because carrier is typically reserved for talking about the recessive dominant interactions.
Right. Question. When you say for some reason, like, are reasons known? And they just vary, so you're not getting into it, or?
That's a really good question. This is not my academic area of expertise.
Right.
So I don't know for sure. My guess would be it probably varies depending on the gene. Like sometimes there's environmental triggers that can turn things on and off. Sometimes it's an age thing. So, I can look into that before our next episode and have a better answer for you.
Again, I think you will want to save the deep dive until season 3.
Okay. Well, maybe I'll table that for later then.
Presuming that they keep close to the book.
Okay. Which I'm assuming they will. They've done, aside from the fact that they did a lot of rearranging of the order of things, I think they've done a very good job of keeping with the spirit of the books.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I know you and Mandy already talked about this, but I'm also a huge fan of the way that they streamlined everything. And it's actually, pretty amazing the way that they kind of disassembled the book and then reassembled it in a completely different order, and yet somehow it works so well.
And it still feels like the book.
Yeah, it's incredible. Actually, my first time watching through the season, it felt a little bit wrong because I had just finished reading book 2 for the first time.
Right. And
my second time through the season, it felt so right because I think the TV show, was more familiar than the book at that point. And it's flawless the way it all fits together. So great job, Bad Wolf.
I agree.
So since there wasn't a whole lot to talk about in terms of actual science and genetics, I thought I might talk a little bit about sewage.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Yeah, everyone's favorite topic. Because, in the first episode, Diana makes the remark that she thought, cities smelled bad in the past all the time. And she was surprised by how fresh the air was. I think that's, an idea that a lot of people have. And I actually know a little bit about the development of sewage processing and engineering because of an environmental science class that I took. So I went back and I found the book that we read for that class. It's called Water 4.0. It's by David Sedlak. And chapter 3 is called Europe's Sewage Crisis and goes through kind of like the history of sewage technology and engineering in London and Paris. And so I thought that might be fun, or at least sort of shed some light on the disconnect between, you know, what we think of old cities being like and how it's presented in the TV show.
Okay, stop me if you're going to answer this throughout, but like, would the city have smelled bad, or like, is the TV show just making it nice for us?
Okay, so I can't answer that question with 100% certainty.
Right.
But I do know that...
I mean, you didn't time walk back to 1590 for us for this episode? What the heck, Anya?
So, you know, the title of the book is called Europe's Sewage... Or the title of the chapter is called Europe's Sewage Crisis. And the sewage crisis happened several hundred years after 1590. So it's really in the 1800s. So I think when people think about old cities being super smelly, they're thinking about that kind of like early industrial revolution time period when the cities actually did smell like shit.
Okay.
But we're not quite there yet. So I'm going to start us out in the year 1276. So at this point, London had about 40 to 50,000 people.
Crazy.
Yeah. And they built a series of pipes from springs that were a few kilometers outside of the city and used that to pipe fresh water into the city. And at this point, when, you know, there were only 40 to 50,000 people, these springs could supply enough water for the full city. Fast forward to the year 1600. So I know I'm overshooting the book a little bit, but at this point, London had about 200,000 people. And their water needs had increased quite a bit to the point that those local springs were no longer sufficient. Mm-hmm. So between 1609 and 1613, there was a private company that built something called the New River Canal to direct water from springs that were even farther away from the city, about 30 kilometers north. And so then at that point, this New River Canal was able to supply enough water for those 200,000 people. So this is happening, you know, right after the period that the book is set in. So you can imagine in 1590, they were probably like a little bit water stressed, but they did have piped water coming in that was available. And, you know, the city wasn't so big that they had a huge sewage problem.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to fast forward again to about 1720. At this point, London had about 600,000 people, and they, you know, at this point, the city was pretty water stressed again, and even the New River Canal couldn't supply enough water to the city. So private companies began taking water out of the Thames for drinking.
Why?
Which is pretty gross.
Like, okay, but my question with that one is, it's gross now. Would it have been gross back then?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Because the city was actually dumping their sewage into the Thames at this point.
Okay. Right. Yes, that makes much more sense. Yep.
And so interestingly, the previous pipes that had been used to bring in water from the springs to the north of the city, they were all gravity powered because it was basically downhill into London.
Right.
But the new pipes that were taking water out of the Thames, they actually needed to be powered somehow. And so there were actually giant water wheels put on London Bridge that were there for hundreds of years, or over 100 years.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because, you know, I mean, everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but I think London Bridge is pretty iconic. Most people have this like image of it and know how old it is, but we don't necessarily have this image of it having these huge water wheels on it.
I mean, well, I don't get technical, but London Bridge is actually the boring one, right?
Oh, is
It's
it?
it's the Tower Bridge that's iconic.
Oh, okay. You're probably right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a quote in the book that I thought I would read out loud because it gives an idea for the quality of the water coming out of the Thames. So this quote is from 1771 by a traveler to London. "If I would drink the water, I must quaff the mawkish contents of an open aqueduct, exposed to all manner of defilement," so he's referring to the New River Canal, "or swallow that which comes from the Thames, impregnated with all the filth of London and Westminster. Human excrement is the least offensive part of the concrete, which is composed of all the drugs, minerals, and poisons used in mechanics and manufacture, enriched with the putrefying carcass of beasts and men, and mixed with the scourings of all the washtubs, kennels, and common sewers within the bills of mortality."
It's not very different than it is today.
No. And certainly not very refreshing sounding.
Yeah.
So in 1822, at this point, there are about 1.4 million people living in London. They removed the water wheels from London Bridge because it turns out they were kind of dangerous for boats. And they moved the water intake from the middle of the river to the shore, where it was then powered by steam engines, now that steam power was an option.
Mm-hmm.
And so during this period, as you might guess from that delightful quote, most rich people drank clean water from springs that they paid to have delivered to their houses. But they still used the piped Thames water for washing and starting in the 1850s for their water closets, which became popular with wealthy people around that time. And so once people started installing water closets in their house, they connected them to the sewer system, which then increased the amount of human waste going into the Thames. So yeah, the plus side is you don't have to use chamber pots or outhouses anymore. Downside, now that's all going directly into the Thames, even more than before.
Wonderful.
So this is when it really, I think, starts to smell pretty bad. And also when cholera outbreaks started to become a problem. First in 1831, and then a second big cholera epidemic in 1848.
It's interesting that the invention of water closets led to it being worse, because you would think that it would be the other way around.
Yeah, it is interesting. The book wasn't super clear about what people were doing with all of the waste in their chamber pots and outhouses, but I think somehow less of it was ending up in the river than with the water closets. So this second cholera epidemic in 1848, you might be familiar with the story of John Snow. Not that John Snow, but he's a pretty famous figure in epidemiology because, as this cholera epidemic was raging in the city, he mapped out where all the cases were and then hypothesized that the cases were coming from this Broad Street water pump.
There's a really good episode of Sawbones about that if anybody wants full details.
Yeah, so he removed the pump handle so that people couldn't get water from that pump and had to go somewhere else. And then the cholera cases all stopped. And it basically, and then they were able to trace all of those cholera infections to one person who was using an outhouse nearby. And that outhouse was leaking into the water supply for that pump. So basically, because of the cholera epidemic in 1849, at this point, London is up to 2.3 million people. One of the water companies moved their intake upstream from where most of the main sewage outflow was. And so during the cholera epidemic, the third big London cholera epidemic that happened 4 years later in 1853, the people who were using water from this company got way less sick than people who were using water from other companies that were still having their water intakes downstream of the main sewage outflow.
Right.
And so then in 1855, the government of the City of London ordered all of the water companies to move their intakes upstream of London. So that was a good temporary solution. But the problem was that London kept on expanding and getting bigger. So it wasn't really a permanent solution. Luckily, the city government also ordered all the companies to start filtering their water. So, and luckily, filtering the water was an effective way to get rid of the bacteria that caused cholera.
Great.
So that really helped stop the spread of cholera in London. Okay, but this takes us to my favorite London sewage fact, which is that in 1858, so at this point, London has about 2.8 million people. There was an extended drought, which lowered the flow of the Thames so much that it created what was called the Great Stink. So in 1858, pretty much all of London actually did smell like sewage.
Fun time.
Just because there was so little water going into the Thames to dilute it, and the flow was so slow that there was just poop everywhere. And so then, not long after that, in 1865, the city built a bunch of pipelines to dump all of London's sewage far downstream of the city. So then at that point, the city became much cleaner, and the sewage became someone else's problem much further downstream.
Great,
so,
I guess.
Yeah, so I guess my main takeaway from all of this is that I think the level of smell has kind of fluctuated a bit over time. And there were certainly times when London did smell a lot like sewage, but I don't think it was a constant problem. And I think in 1590, London was still small enough that it wasn't quite that bad.
Right.
At least as it was, 100 and 200 years later.
Makes sense. So it was probably about 200,000 people in 1590-ish. Okay. Yeah, that's not...
Yeah, so that's my sewage story. I hope you enjoyed it. And then, so I did one other piece of research about the history related to these episodes that I didn't hear you and Mandy talk about. And that's that the School of Night,
right,
we're not actually sure that it exists. So there's not a lot of firm evidence that all of these men actually knew each other. There is a lot of contemporary speculation about their connections from both, I think, that era and then shortly thereafter, people writing about the Elizabethan era. But there's not concrete evidence that the School of Night was actually a thing. That was kind of a name applied to them after the fact.
I did know that about the name, but I guess I just assumed that it was known that they knew each other.
Yeah, apparently not. Well, at least according to Wikipedia. Again, I'm not actually Deborah Harkness, but that seems to be the case.
That is one of the things that I really like about Deborah Harkness, and because I think it's a lot of the time you think about somebody who's got a PhD in their field and who don't know how to have fun with it, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah.
But Deborah Harkness is very much like, let's put some whimsy onto this history.
Yeah.
And I like that about her.
Yeah. I love too that, like, she takes some things that are factually super well known and then other things, that are maybe, theories or things that are suggested. And she's basically like, writing her own historical fan fiction based on what she thinks it was like. And I love it.
Yeah, it's great.
Also, I forgot how pretty this show is. Like, I think especially the early episodes when they're spending a lot of time in like really dark spaces and like dungeons. The cinematography is just so good.
I haven't checked if there's like different cinematographers this season, because I liked last season a lot cinematography wise, but this season is just like elevated.
Yeah. Yeah, like last season wasn't bad, but there were lots of times this season where I felt like I was watching like an actual movie, you know?
Yeah. And some of that might be the bigger budget that they have this season. I don't know.
Yeah, like there's a few scenes, I can't remember if it was with Diana or Matthew, where you're just looking down from above and it's just so pretty.
Yeah, I don't know how if they built the interior of where they're staying, if they built it as like a 2-story set, because some of the shots you really get a feel for the space that they're in, and they'll like look up from below and look down from, you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Anyways, it really feels like a real space.
Yeah. Well, and they show them going up and down stairs a lot.
Yeah.
Which, especially after listening to the episode where you and Mandy talked about how, at least in the exterior sets, like the second story doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Well, the interior would be nowhere near the exteriors.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Although, I don't know, because, like, what about those balcony scenes? I don't know.
No, the balcony scenes would be exterior, yes. But anything interior, they go through a door, they're gone from there. They're in the studio.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess they must have built the second story on some of them, right? Because they had to do all those balcony scenes.
Oh, yeah. But that is also in like a enclosed courtyard area, right? So they can finish that one area and then not finish the rest of it. Which is genius design, again, because then it does mean that they only have to finish that one area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess, I don't know, the rest of the things that I wanted to talk about, I just kind of took some notes. I don't know if I just like run through them and then
talk about whatever you want to talk about. This is your time to talk about the show. And how much you love it. Or don't love it, whatever you're feeling, I guess.
I mean, I pretty much loved everything. I did find it really funny that Matthew made a big deal out of Diana hiding the bite mark on her neck, and then they immediately just give up 100%. Like in every single scene when she's going out, her hair is like tied back in some fancy style that is exposing the bite mark.
Yeah, and only one person ever really says anything about it, and that's Hubbard.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Which, I mean, the impression that I get, right, is just that the style was to have your hair back, so it would have looked super weird if she hadn't done that. But also then, like, why make a big deal out of it? I guess they were just trying to remind us that it exists.
Yeah, maybe. But also, like, they could have given her lace collar thingies.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. I am also very grateful that you and Mandy pointed out about Not Sophie, because honestly, I didn't even notice that was the same actress.
Neither, neither did my sister, who I watched all the episodes with, until, like, the last episode. She was like, oh, that's the same actress. I'm like, it's been 10 fucking episodes.
I don't know. I mean, you and Mandy commented on this, but, like, the way she carries her face and, like, the vibe she's giving off and the hair and the makeup, it's so different.
Oh, yeah, she's a good actress.
Yeah, and now I see why they gave her an American accent in the rest of the show. It's like to throw you off.
Well, the character is American in the books, too.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I didn't remember that. Oh, I guess, well, this kind of is a science nitpick, but the scene with the chick hatching,
mm-hmm.
I thought it was super well done, but that's also way faster than it happens in real life. Like, I have watched enough chickens hatch that from, like, the first peck to actually being able to, like, walk around and like, chirp is at least a few hours.
It's a magic chicken, Anya.
Yeah. Okay, you're right. That's the only excuse you need is it's a magic chicken. I mean, it would have been really, really boring to have her sit there for that long. So, excellent decision.
I don't know why, but that just reminded me of, I sometimes, like, purposely get into arguments with people when they say that the vampires in Twilight aren't realistic. And I'm like, oh, you believe in vampires? I didn't know that about you. You believe that they're real and they're walking amongst us?
I mean, yeah. The sparkles, that's the one thing that really pulls me out of it.
I mean, but who's to say, really?
Yeah. I have been loving Matthew and Diana so much in this season. Their relationship just feels so real. Like, their fights are all super well motivated. Like, it's real conflict that you understand where both of them are coming from and like what the real impasse is.
Mm-hmm.
And then their affection also just feels so real. You can understand, they have a common goal that they're working towards together. And they're both so competent. It's just like this awesome power couple dream team, like when they are in sync and working towards that, it works so well.
I agree. And one of the things that I really love about the fighting that they do have is that it's never misunderstandings that could be solved with just sitting down and talking.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's I find that so frustrating. It's so much TV does that. Where it's like, if you would just talk to each other, this wouldn't be happening.
Yeah, their conflicts are always super rooted in like both character and plot.
Yes.
Yeah. And like, you and Mandy talked about this too, but the Matthew's eye roll when Diana is just deciding to go off and talk is like so good.
I also I think it's in episode 2. I don't know. They have one fight where you can tell that they like are disagreeing, but they're not angry at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that a lot, that they're, having a back and forth where they very much disagree, but they're still like laughing and smiling. Mm-hmm. And I like, that's just very real to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we should talk about Kit and how amazing he is.
I think you and I have a differing opinion here, but sure.
Well, I mean, I like TV show Kit much better than I like book Kit.
Oh, I do too, yes.
Yeah, I feel like book Kit is just irritating, whereas like TV show Kit, you are annoyed by him, but you also feel pity for him at the same time.
I guess I should specify what I said. It's not necessarily that I like TV show Kit better so much as I think he is like genuinely less evil.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, if he were more evil, I might like him more because that's just me. But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. He's at least more interesting.
In some scenes.
Yeah. I did like in that scene that Kit had with Matthew, they're really foreshadowing Matthew's blood rage, I think, in a way that didn't quite come through as much in the book. I mean, I guess we haven't gotten there yet, so maybe I should just cut all that out.
No, because this book talks about Matthew having blood rage, so that's fine.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I guess we haven't seen Matthew's blood rage, but there is, I think you can see him almost go into blood rage in that scene. And so I think that really helps builds the tension for when it actually happens later on.
Yes.
I loved Kit and Louisa together.
I think did too.
Louisa has some serious Drusilla vibes.
I didn't think about that until I read your note here, but yes, absolutely, she does.
She's like not quite as crazy as Drusilla, but definitely in that direction.
Yeah.
And is super pulling it off.
I definitely feel like that's exactly what they were going for. They even, like, she has a lot of the same sort of features.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to say they look similar, but if you were to describe them, you'd kind of use the same words.
It's like a slight brunette. Someone who looks very delicate, but is actually incredibly fierce.
Exactly, yes.
And so I guess while we're on the topic of Louisa, I asked you this before, and I don't think we really came to any conclusion, but that scene with Louisa and Kit in the pub, it seems like she's almost reading him with that kiss in the same way that vampires read people by drinking their blood.
I mean, it's possible that she, used her teeth.
Or that she's just like super intuitive and could tell that, I don't know. It just seems like a strong logical leap to go from this man doesn't want to kiss me to, oh, he's clearly in love with my brother. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's genuinely my answer to this is I don't know.
I'd be curious to hear what the listeners think. If you have an opinion, please email Kate, since she has to deal with all of that.
You can email the podcast at desiremaderealpod@gmail.com.
But you're the one who has to read the emails.
Yes. Well, we'll probably do the emails on our wrap-up episode, which you will be there for.
Okay. And then, so the other thing that I really loved about that episode, and I didn't notice that until my second time through, but there's, I think, some parallelism between Kit refusing the kiss from Louisa in the pub and then Matthew refusing to have sex with Diana in the tent. Because they both are having their, like, overtures rejected, but then to, like, really different effects. Because, when Louisa gets rejected, she uses it, I guess, to gain insight into Kit, and then by knowing more about him, they end up, like, bonding and becoming closer together.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Matthew refuses Diana, it actually, like, genuinely pisses her off and like, creates this wall and this barrier of no intimacy between them. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I think, and it read to me as intentional.
I can see. I absolutely did not pick up on that. You haven't heard it yet, but we did not discuss the parallelism at all when we recorded.
Mm-hmm. I guess Isabeau is fantastic.
Always.
Yeah. I think there's a really subtle character arc that they're building with her, as like a tertiary character in the show this season. But with her relationship with Emily and Sarah, the way that they start off super adversarial and then kind of slowly warm up to each other.
Yeah.
I fucking loved her. This meeting could have been an email snipe at Joubert.
Yeah, she delivers it so good. So well. Whatever.
Oh, and I love it too that that's just like a genre of tweet at this point, I think. And she just like, she doesn't strike, she doesn't come across as a super tech savvy modern woman, but even she is on this meeting could have been an email train.
Yeah.
I also loved her super deadpan delivery to Marcus of, yes. Well, now you'll have to kill her. Like
that was the best. It followed like quickly by, saved by her lack of imagination.
Yeah.
That's good.
Oh, like that casting and performance is just so perfect. I totally believe both her and Philippe as like, I have been alive for thousands of years and I, just like stone-faced in control of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess while we're talking about Philippe, yeah, amazing casting. The way he just seems totally chill and in control all the time. He sees everything. He manipulates Matthew and Diana effortlessly.
Mm-hmm.
Then he like turns into a Jewish mom and tries to feed Matthew. And his, I will not insult either of us by pretending I did not hear that, like, just incredible. And his bonding with Diana over the books, you can, like, again, like, really feel that genuine relationship developing between them. Yeah, so I guess I did have a couple other historical points to bring up with regard to Queen Elizabeth. I think you and Mandy commented on her smallpox scars, right, that they added to the actress?
I don't think we did.
Oh, then maybe I was thinking of something else. But yeah, so
I might have retweeted something about it.
Okay, yeah, so Queen Elizabeth, when she was 29 in 1562, she caught smallpox and ended up with scars on her face that led to her wearing lots of lead makeup. And so I kind of went down this rabbit hole because her forehead is just so big.
Yeah.
Like so big. So I was just Googling Queen Elizabeth's forehead. Why is it so large? And there's one theory that basically her hair loss was caused by like wearing so much lead makeup because of her smallpox scars.
Right.
So yeah, not for sure, but that's one possibility. We do definitely know that having a big forehead was seen as very fashionable, and women would like pluck their eyebrows and specifically pluck them to be like as low on their brow as possible so that their forehead would look bigger. I'm assuming that with that actress, they put some sort of prosthetic on top of her hair.
I would presume also, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've seen a picture of her outside of a costume, but I can't bring it to mind.
I also really, really loved Marcus and Phoebe in the TV show.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm so glad about it because I hated Marcus and Phoebe in the book. Or more specifically, I hated Marcus in the book. He is such a douchebag when he tries to pick Phoebe up. Like, he's just like, I think Deborah Harkness was trying to write him as like super suave and charming, right. But he just comes across as like really pushy and like kind of a misogynist douchebag. So like I don't know. It annoyed me so much that I actually pulled out the book to read some quotes because it made me that mad.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it's a pleasure doing business with you, Phoebe, even if we did do it standing up. This time. Marcus paused, smiled his charming smile. You don't mind me calling you Phoebe. Phoebe did mind. She rubbed her neck in exasperation, pushing aside her black collar-length hair. Marcus's eyes lingered on the curve of her shoulders. When she made no reply, he closed the box, tucked the miniatures under his arm, and backed away. And then, so skipping forward a little bit, I just wanted you to know that you could wear those shoes again without fearing you'd break your neck, Marcus said innocently. His eyes traveled slowly from her toes over her black leather pumps, lingered on her ankles, and then crawled up the curve of her calf. I like them. Who did this man think he was? He was behaving like an 18th century rake. So, yeah, I like that the TV show, I think, made him actually charming instead of, like, fake, old school, man out of time charming.
Right.
You know, he's actually interested in what she's interested in, and then they flirt about nerdy things, and then she shows that interest back by, like, Googling his music. You know, like, it just felt way more real. Like, I can understand why they like each other in the TV show, whereas in the book, it just seemed like he liked her super superficially, and she didn't like him at all. But I love that, you know, like, even right away, they're being really honest with each other, right? Like, in the restaurant, when he comes back from the conversation with Domenico, she just calls him on his bullshit. She's like, so is hot and cold your thing?
Right.
And then, you know, he responds by being actually kind of genuine with her, by switching to a topic that he can be genuine with her on. You know, it just, I don't know. I felt like it worked really well.
I thought so too. So what this really is we're saying that we outnumber Mandy.
Yeah, Mandy's wrong, yeah. I think is what we're saying. And I'm sure, like, you know, it's probably been a while since Mandy's read the book, so maybe she just doesn't remember book 2. Like, maybe Marcus and Phoebe are actually good in book 3, and that's what she's remembering. I don't know. I haven't gotten there yet.
No comment.
Yeah. I really liked the stuff with Marcus and Baldwin. I mean, again, everyone hates Baldwin because he's terrible.
I mean, a lot of people like Baldwin a lot, but I think that's because of the actor.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like Baldwin does a really good job of tempting Marcus with arguments that are actually persuasive to him, right? Like, Marcus is like the Little Mermaid. He wants to be where the people are, and Baldwin knows that and is using it against him. Sorry. That was just, like, all I could think about in that scene.
The Little Mermaid.
Yeah. I'm sure he would appreciate that.
Honestly, I think, well, I don't know about Marcus, but Edward Vermel would, definitely.
Yeah, and also, like, the conversation between Marcus and Nathaniel about the Knights, and the fact that Nathaniel's pointing out that, yeah, like, the Knights aren't doing shit. There's so much horrible shit going on in the world, and, you know, the Knights need a rebrand, as he so eloquently says it.
I also really enjoyed that bit.
Yeah, I like that the show, I think, is doing a good job of setting up Marcus to be in a situation where, you know, his choice to either stay loyal to his promise to Matthew or betray it is going to be a real choice. Like, you can see that he's conflicted. And then I guess I'll end just with a few comments about Diana. Her putting on pants in episode 5 and then just, like, staring down all the men is probably my favorite thing from the season so far.
It was good. I mean, I'm not a big fan of episode 5, but it had really good moments in it.
Yeah. And I also, you know, trigger warning for mentions of sexual assault, but I think the show is leaning much harder on the rape metaphor for the witch interrogating and, like, trying to steal the memories out of Diana than the book did, both in terms of how violent the scene feels, and also the fact that, you know, she's saying, I said no, and vocalizing that over and over again, and he's ignoring that. And I don't remember it being quite that concrete or clear in the book.
I feel like in the book they went in a different direction with it, with sort of having it, because in the book Diana, when Satu captured and tortured her, that was a lot more traumatic for her, and she had a lot of more like on screen, as it were, PTSD. So I think they kind of went that direction with it in the book, if I'm remembering correctly. I literally just read the book like last week, but whatever. And then obviously in the show, because they wanted to move things along faster, they didn't have her quite as traumatized from the capture, which makes sense for, you know, the pace that they had to keep.
Yeah.
And so they went with it just being its own trauma. And therefore, I think the metaphor just kind of happens when somebody's trying to take something that isn't theirs like that.
Yeah. And because I guess, you know, they're having to motivate her to murder a person, right? And we know that that's not something that Diana does lightly, especially compared to all the vampire characters like Isabeau, apparently. And so, yeah, I guess maybe they felt like they had to do that to motivate her in that way. But I think, yeah, I can see how that could be really triggering to certain people to watch. But I think the show handled it with care. Like, it didn't seem callous to me, at least in the way that they did it. And they, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's that thing that a lot of shows have when they're adapting books. Like, you got to adapt what's there. And, you know, there's always well, I mean, this is going to come up later, but you always have to make a choice about how you adapt something problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, yeah, it's something that I want to keep an eye on going forward. Is I think the show is making some really intentional statements on certain things in a way that the book maybe didn't necessarily. And this is one of those where I think it's really showing, like, no, like, this person trying to mess with her mind is a violation of her, like, bodily autonomy and personhood in a really intense way.
Yeah.
And I think that rape metaphor really works.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay, well, that's pretty much all I had to say. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to ask me?
I can't believe you didn't mention Jack. Do you like Jack? Do you not like Jack? No Jack?
I do like Jack. He's really adorable. His accent is so cute. I wonder if that is the actor kid's real accent or if he's putting that on.
I genuinely don't know.
Yeah. Again, I'm like absolutely not an expert in British accents at all, but it seemed really different and like more low class, I think, than all of the other accents that we heard on the show. So it seems like it might be something that he was putting on. And if so, then like kudos to that kid, because accents are hard for adults.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm just a heartless bitch, but like I never felt like that connected to Jack in the book. And so I think maybe some of that carried over to me in the TV show. Like, he's adorable, but I'm not that emotionally attached to him. I mean, I'll have more to say about him in our next episode, because I think I get more attached to him as the show goes on.
All right.
Yeah. I guess I do appreciate the role that I think Jack plays in this book of showing Matthew as a paternal character who cares about children in like a really sweet, affectionate way. Because I think it kind of does something interesting to that like broody, dark vampire archetype.
Yeah.
It like gives it a softer side in a way that, you know, the more like cliche version of that archetype doesn't.
Yeah, they call that out specifically in the book, which is a conversation that they cut out of the show where Diana's like, oh, I always just pictured vampires as being like lone creatures. And Matthew's like, do you want to see my vampire family tree? There are hundreds of us.
Yeah.
And then Diana's like, yeah, I have one friend.
Yeah. Yeah, so I like that Jack reveals that other side of Matthew. And that it's a little bit of subverting or adding some depth to the archetype that Matthew is playing.
I like that too. And I like that it shows, I guess, something that comes up much, much later, like in book 3, is Diana realizing that somehow in the past she managed to be like a part of the family and to have her interests and her training, and she'd balanced herself with it, with all these different aspects of herself. And I like that Jack kind of represents that sort of at home family aspect of Diana.
Yeah.
And that was our bonus episode. Hope it tides you over in your wait for episode 6. I think I got that math right. You can tweet at us at DesireMadeReal. I'm Caitlin, and you can follow me and find my other shows on Twitter at InferiorCaitlin.
I'm Anya, and you can find me on Twitter at StrangelyLiteral. That's strangely, then LITERL.
And remember to check out all the other Eloquent Gushing shows at eloquentgushing.com. Mandy usually does that bit. I don't know what else she says. Yeah.
We love you, Mandy.
Yeah. And until we meet again, remember that with every ending, there is a new beginning.